Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Do I have a motion?
I do indeed. I'd like to make a motion to move to executive session pursuant to MRSA Title I, Section 4056E, to consult with the city attorney regarding a personnel matter.
Second.
All those in favor? Oh, I have a motion by Councilor Lyson, seconded by Councilor Ray. All those in favor?
I beat you to it.
It's easier to just look all down this. So we're here for a budget work session on recreation, recreation activity fund, and utilities.
Yes, so recreation begins on page 67. There were 3 new programs and service requests. The first one was to hire a recreation programmer at $71,000. The second is to elevate and convert a part-time seniors coordinator to a full-time recreation program aide. And then the final request was to fund the remaining aquatics temporary wages as part of general fund. The recreation had an overall increase of $34,000, or 11.9%. If you're looking at the recreation administration, which is the first division on page 67, you have an overall increase there of just shy of $9,900, or 6.4%. Pretty much all of that is in personal services, with an increase of $10,320. Contractual services was essentially flat with 2 minor offsetting fluctuations. Travel funds to attend the national conference were offset with the repairs to equipment. Supplies decreased by $835 in office supplies and printing costs, and fixed costs rose by $260 for the National Recreation and Parks Association. The Armory is on page 67, halfway through that page. You have an overall increase here of $23,057, or just shy of 19%. I will note, you will see increases excuse me, in most all of the contractual services, because the school department is no longer funding the 12.63% when they were doing the Star Academy program there. So that all came back on the city's budget, and that was the driving force to the increase in the contractual services. So you have an increase in utilities of $9,000, which was also impacted by electricity increases. Cleaning services of $5,500, outside rental of $3,000, and again, that's for snow removal. And repairs to equipment for $2,200 for the heating system. Repairs to a building for $3,300 for floor refinishing and painting. And then $500 to rekey the locks after the Lewiston Public School moves out at the end of this year. The Lewiston Seniors Program, which is at the bottom of this page, had an overall increase of $1,077, or 13.6%, and that is essentially all in personal services here. The rec program begins on page 68. Again, just as a reminder for the council and the viewing audience, this is a special revenue account. The fees and tuition payments stay within that fund. It's not part of general fund, and it has no tax implication on the city at this time. The budgeted deficit was reduced by $4,894. And if you look down through there, you will see it starts on page 68. You have a miscellaneous category, and then you have each activity, so you can show we're on page 68. Did you have a question?
Still have a
Oh,
question.
sorry.
Sorry, the field usage fees, what fields are we talking about?
It's for all of the fields.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I think there was an item that came up last week about the fee structure, and then it was a question of,
Yeah, there was a proposal coming forward on, there is a proposal that will be coming forward on the fee structure for the fields in particular to address the fees for the new turf fields at the high school. That got a little ahead of itself, so we pulled it off the agenda so that staff could take a closer look at it, and we could have some additional conversation. We've been working with the school, the high school athletic director. We also wanted to bring Bill into the conversation. So we had that meeting earlier this week, and this week.
Monday,
Yeah.
yeah.
And They are doing some more work on that policy, and it'll be coming forward probably at the meeting of the 16th.
Okay, so I know that this is expenditures. I think there was some confusion on the school committee side about who deals with the revenues and expenditures of particularly the Franklin pasture fields, because there's also
Yes.
boosters fundraising happening. So I don't know, I think that needs to be a more global conversation is my best guess, based on the fee structure and what's going on, or just a clarification at some point of who's on first, at some point.
Yeah, our involvement is limited to, is limited to maintaining the fees and collecting the revenues for field usage. Anything that the Boosters Club does or any other group does out there in association with games is basically stays with that group, and I take that, and I believe obviously there's some form of relationship between the Boosters Clubs and the athletic department at the school department.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
I think the only thing is we're gonna be looking at long-term, how do we maintain and what's needed to kind of cabbage away for capital to replace it when it's, over its life cycle. So that's some of the stuff we were cleaning up.
Thank you.
Counselor Marcotte? Sorry.
That's good.
Well, when we go down through this, these 5 pages, the accounts that start with 3 revenues,
I'm sorry?
the accounts that start with 3, I assume, are revenues.
Correct.
And we're comparing the second column, original budget, to the next to last recommended.
Yes.
So, and just looking at the very first category, where it says 4,272 in the second column and 9,845 in the next to last, that would mean that we're actually seeing the fund increase by a little over $5,000.
That's correct. And with the driving force there was the field usage fees, which was not budgeted this year, as well as a $1,000 increase in investment earnings.
Okay, I just wanted to be able to.
And we think those numbers may be conservative. We don't really have a good handle on how much utilization those fields are going to get. We know it's going to go up because there's a great deal of demand for them in the shoulder seasons when a regular turf field is not playable.
So the concern would be if in the 2020 recommended column, the number was negative, and then the biggest concern would be the grand total at the bottom, that on page 71, which in this case, we're seeing more revenue than expense.
That's correct.
And you previously said that there was no tax impact.
That's correct.
And one caveat there, one of the things that we are talking about, which might affect the revenues for the field uses, is designating at least a portion of those funds toward replacement, given the high cost of turf field maintenance or long-term replacement capital depreciation.
We're talking about 3 different positions. That's not currently in the budget?
That's correct.
Could you, Jason, we know the school is leaving. How do you envision the utilization of the space, and how does that affect, the program and revenue aspects? Just simply, I mean, that's a relatively large change, and I was glad to take a tour with you to understand that better, but maybe you can just share it.
So we'll utilize the space better for our own programs. All of our programs are expanding and seeing growing numbers, and we're working with Boys and Girls Club to try to develop a middle school after school program as well, to add another tenant. So we're working on some things.
Counselor Ray?
Just in terms of the list, I'd really like to see increasing the program aid to full-time as part of that, based on what we've heard so far.
One of the things I might suggest that we do, and Councilor Marcotte had asked for this last night, and I haven't had a chance to talk to Heather yet. He's asked for a spreadsheet that just lays out all of the additional positions that have been requested, including the 2 that are included in the budget, so you can see them all on one sheet with the department, the positions, and the cost. You may want to separately revisit that list as a part of the end of budget discussion, decision-making process.
So, I'm not clear on what your request was.
So, I pulled up the new programs and services detail, and, one of the 3 new program or service detail requests from recreation was increasing the current half-time program aide to full-time, so they
Program
take on.
aide, I didn't hear the
Yeah,
aide
so
part.
they
Okay.
take on benefits and, more hours.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So to Councilor Marcotte's point, looking down through there, most of the programs have an overall surplus, if you will, are income producing. The significant one that has been an issue, as in prior years, is on page 71, the aquatics program. You do see a $18,000 deficit there, and that relates to, the reason why that actually increases is the increase in minimum wage. That includes the $7,500 that general fund is contributing to those portions of that. With the recreation fund, you have an overall fund balance available to support the activity funds of $191,751. So you'll see that on the bottom of the page. That's their fund balance, if you will, or the projected fund balance, if you will.
Councilor Marcotte?
So comparing the two numbers at the bottom, that's $15,846 of growth in the funds. If I'm reading it right.
Correct.
And $191,751 available if we were to bring in some of those positions. And of course, that would continue.
Traditionally, the activity funds do not pay for the full-time position. That would be a general fund impact, unless the council wanted to approve funding of that nature.
And that's why I asked for the spreadsheet of all the positions, because I'm not looking at the overall mill rate at the end. And when I look down through recreation, and Madam Mayor probably remembers when we had the brief discussion about the pool. And I support that in several different ways. Probably have to look at the details, but it needs to be a program that continues and maybe even expanded upon.
The pool.
The pool. I mean, we need a community that knows how to swim, if you know what I mean.
Jason, I know you've had trouble getting lifeguards and stuff in the past. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
As minimum wage raises and goes up, it's becoming like a statewide issue to find lifeguards, people who are willing to, protect people and save them from drowning and have that responsibility while making, they can make 50 cents less and just be at the pool as an aquatic aid, taking registrations. So it's a statewide issue that we're running into finding lifeguards.
So, you're saying because the minimum wage is
Councilor
raised-
Lyson.
What, you mean, there's other businesses that are more competitive because they're less responsibility? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, so they can take on a lot less responsibility for having to save somebody's life and still make very close to the same amount of rate.
Would we consider raising their wages to make that more competitive?
We can do that, but there's also still the getting them certified. So right now we only have one, I think, of our 4 from last year that are coming back because there's a lot of certifications that they need to finish.
Now, do we work with anyone like the WISE or whatever for certification programs to get those available for prospective
Yeah,
lifeguards?
the YWC usually does certification, and we usually, every time they hold one of those, we try to just let them know that anybody who gets certified we'd like to have them, come interview for a job at Kennedy Park for the pool.
Age requirement with the lifeguard?
We don't have a specific one, just
Okay.
Yeah.
As long as they're.
as long as they pass their certification.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to add that, backing up everything you just said, we have a hard time getting lifeguards at the college for both adults
Right.
trying to get certification because it's such a process, and for students who are trying to get certification. So
Any
can I
other-
just ask a question about the pool?
Yep.
So, I think that Councilor Marcotte and I are on the same page in terms of, you know, believing that the pool is a really important piece to this community, and I think a lot of people in the community would agree with us. I think there's also my concern about moving it to the general fund is that then it gets added into the property tax mill rate. And then, you know, becomes an easier thing to cut when people want to cut the mill rate. And so I guess I'm just wondering from you, Heather, like, is there any more safety to it being where it is?
Yeah, I think there is some. I mean, one of the reasons we started looking at
I
moving
mean, as we
the,
have this conversation, I want to
Right.
make sure we're looking at the bigger picture.
one of the reasons we started having the conversations about aquatics is that for a period of time, the Recreation Athletics Fund was losing money. So its fund balance was declining. And that decline was being largely driven by the pool deficit. So I think that started that conversation. To Jason and his staff's credit, they have done a great job in improving and expanding the programs that we offer and bringing in more money into that fund. So that problem has pretty much gone away, at least for the moment. There's no guarantees going forward in the future. But I think that Jason and his staff are very interested in trying to continue that trend. And I guess one of the things, you know, in terms of some of the additional personnel he's requesting would be to, you know, make a challenge to see how much of that might be assumed by, you know, additional revenue growth, even though we historically have not used this fund to support any of those positions. So, you ready to be challenged?
He never says no.
I know.
He never says no.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions on the rec fund? Otherwise, the first utility fund is water on page 79.
I just wanted to make, I thought this was,
Point of order, Madam Mayor.
but I think.
So, Jim, sorry, Counselor Lyson, can you
Yeah.
just, before you start talking, can you just put your hand up so I can acknowledge you?
Yeah, I was trying to,
Thanks.
before we were moving on to something else,
Yeah.
it was just a quick, thank you,
Thanks.
Madam Chair.
So on page 79, you have the water division pro forma. You have an overall decrease in revenue here of about $100,000 or 1.86%, and an increase in expenditures of $114,785 or 2%. Looking down through here, the personal services have increased by $20,759. That includes a $14,000 increase in regular time due to steps and contractual settlements, a $4,200 increase in temporary wages, and a $2,100 increase in overtime. Fringe benefits, even though we haven't gotten to that part in the general fund, you had that same increase that we're seeing in general fund, where fringe benefits rose by about $7,400. Includes percentage-based deductions when the salary increases. Obviously, anything that's a percentage-based fringe benefit, which includes Social Security, deferred comps, and main PERS, will also increase. We also are seeing a higher health insurance cost. We had about 5.86% increase this past January. We're budgeting about an 8% increase in next January. And then, like we saw in, I think, the city administrator's budget memo, he talked about the workers' comp and kind of bridging that gap a little bit. That impacts all three utilities as well. Debt service increased by $113,396. And in water's case, we have a decrease of $15,000. If you turn to page 78, you will see all of the capital for all three utilities. The top section is what's funded in the operating budget. The bottom section is what's funded in the bond issue. So in the waters, we have the typical meter replacement program. We have the pickup trucks. We also have the radio read, the flex devices, and the dark fiber hardware for the SCADA the SCADA nodes. Excuse me. The operating expenses decreased by 11,755.9%. If you look down through there, beginning on page 80, kind of looking at each one of the water divisions, the source of supplies had a decrease of $9,300. In contractual services of $10,000 and hazmat requirements of $8,800 based upon historical usage, and that's offset by an increase of $2,100 in power purchase. The water treatment, which is your 6030, had a decrease of $37,243. Our portion of the watershed apportionment declined by $31,450. We had a slight reduction in materials and supplies based upon usage, and that was offset by an increase in contractual service management of $12,582, which is the cost-sharing account with the Auburn Water District personnel, training, and so forth. The distribution expense, the 60500, which is kind of at the bottom of the page and continues at the top of page 81, had an increase of $1,800. The increase in building rental, and you will see this on all three funds, of $3,500 to upgrade the HVAC unit. That, again, that's going to be a common denominator for all three funds. And equipment rental charges for trucks and towing trailers for the mowing and flushing crews, which are your temporary workers. The customer accounts, which is the 6070, had an increase of $29,000, and pretty much all $25,000 of that is in maintenance and licensing. That includes the census, customer portal, the Beehive, the unlimited modules, and GIS increases, as well as internal overhead charges for the Treasury office for $1,700 and about $1,000 for printing due to a new contract for utility bills. The last section in the water account is in the general and admin expenses, the 6080. Had an increase of $3,460. We had a reduction in regulatory costs of $5,000, offset by an increase in materials and supplies of $7,500 for the utilities share of the new plotter and scanner in the engineering department, as well as wireless access points throughout the city. And again, all of those will impact all three utilities as well. Sewer is on page 85. We have an overall decrease in revenue of $137,584, or 2.12%, and an increase in expenditures of $144,288. Personal services decreased $12,436, and that's due to attrition in the regular time. That dropped by $13,306, and then we had a slight increase in overtime of $1,300, as well as a $2,200 increase in temporary wages. Fringe benefits also rose by $14,339. Again, it's that same adjustments that we talked about in water with the percentage base in the health insurance and workers' comp. Debt service rose by $240,000. We had the treatment plant, and that's for the Water Pollution Control Authority, rose by $2,226. And then we had a decrease in capital outlay of $105,600. The operating expenses decreased by $25,145, or 4.4%.
Heather, can you hold on one second? Counselor Ray?
Sorry.
Looking back on the pro forma for water division, there's a revenue called sewer meter service, and I'm wondering why that's under water and not sewer.
Because
I guess I don't know what it is, probably.
we share the cost of the water meters and bill sewer
Okay.
for that portion.
Okay, so that's coming out in the expenses under sewer then?
Yes.
Okay. Peter, to pay Paul. Okay, thank you.
So in the operating expenses, again, we had a decrease of $25,145, or 4.04%. You look at the pump station, which is at the top of page 86. We had a decrease of $3,250. That included a reduction in power purchase of $7,200 and hazmat of $2,600, offset by increase in contractual services of $6,600, which is a portion of our SCADA team that rose in this current budget. The $62,500, which is the transmission operations, that's at the bottom of page 86. We have a decrease there of $30,630, and it pretty much decreases in, noted in contractual services, other of $35,000, which more than offsets the increases in rental of building and equipment that we saw in water for the HVAC unit and the dozer pickup truck rental that we saw in water as well. The customer accounts, which is at the top of page 87, had an increase there of about $6,600, of which maintenance and licensing rose $3,900. And again, the internal overhead charges for treasury of $1,600 and printing and postage. And then we had a small decrease in contractual services there. The admin and general expenses rose by $2,100 due to increases in materials and supplies. Again, that's the proration for the engineering plotter and scanner. That was offset by reductions in legal fees of $2,000 and insurance allocations of $1,300. Questions? Huh?
You're crushing it.
And stormwater on page 90. Revenues are flat here. You have an overall increase of expenditures of $188,000, or 6.47%. Personal services decreased by $9,000. The biggest portion of that is in regular time, that's cross-charged here, of $14,886 due to, again, that's the cross-charging for highways and so forth, doing things like sweeping and drainage work and things like that. That was offset by an increase in temporary wages of $4,300. And again, that's impacted by the minimum wage that we've seen elsewhere. And then we had a slight increase in overtime of $1,500. Fringe benefits actually decreased here, and that reflects the budgets, or the benefits that the new employees, you have a fairly new hiring pool of employees on this fund, and it's based upon the benefits that they selected. So the fringe benefits actually declined here by $4,400. That offset the increase in debt service of $150,200, in capital outlay of $3,100. And then we also had an increase of $20,238 in operating expenses, and that started in the planning and permitting on page 91. We had an increase here of $8,275. An increase of engineering services from general fund makes the lion's share of that at $9,100. We had a slight decrease in training of $300 and materials and supplies of $800. The storage and retention, which is in the middle of 91, we had a decrease of $4,155, and the bulk of that is in supplies of $5,000. We did a lot of replacements for pumps and transducers for last year that we did not have those repeat costs this year. And that was mitigated the increase in purchasing power of $1,400. The collection system operations are 6450, increased by $1,800. So you have, again, the engineering services that increased by $960. And the allotment of the PW building rental, as we've seen elsewhere, of the $3,500 for the HVAC unit. And the last division in here is the customer service accounts, the 700. We have an overall increase here of $14,300. $3,200 of that is in maintenance and licensing. We have increases in overhead charges for management, accounting, collection service, and so forth. That totaled $4,000. Printing and postage also rose by about $2,000, and materials and supplies by $5,500 for the proration of that engineering plotter and scanner. So you'll see the common theme throughout all three of the utilities.
I mean, one of the characteristics of the three utilities we operate is there's a lot of shared personnel between those utilities, and then certainly between highways and the utilities, so that a lot of the personnel costs you see, particularly in stormwater, reflects personnel from other divisions that do that work.
Correct.
Counselor Lyson?
Thank you. I apologize for not asking additional questions. It's not a lot of money, but what are we doing with the no-name pond community septic system? Is that like a yearly maintenance fee to make sure that that pump station's working well? And
Yeah, those are the annual fees for inspection and maintenance that we've incurred, including power and all operations.
and that's still functioning well? And
It is. We just renewed the license last year for
great.
discharge.
Thank you.
Vegetation management, there's a lot of, to keep it running well, isn't it?
So I am all set, unless there's more questions, Councilor Marcotte.
I will admit that that was whirlwind and trying to follow, and maybe I was trying to follow it too intently to even capture what was said. But I'm looking at, on page 879, towards the bottom, total cash. Does that suggest that we're budgeting for a drawdown from $741,000 to $85,000?
Well, if you look at the actual administrative recommendation, yes. We're looking at starting a beginning cash of $741,000 with an anticipated operating deficit of $500,000.
Okay, no, the furthest column.
Yes.
Okay.
This was one of the questions that was raised somewhat in the preliminary presentation of the budget. We're clearly looking at the need to increase water rates. If we don't do it this year, we're for sure going to have to do it next year. So one of the alternatives was, or one of the questions was, do you want to wait a year and look at what might be a rate increase in the range of 20% plus? Or do you want to look at splitting it into two and doing one in this fiscal year at a smaller level and a second one at the next year's level? So, I mean, I'd be interested in hearing some feedback on that, because we can certainly have our folks in finance come up with some alternative and possible mix and projections.
I'd rather not do it this year.
Yeah.
I'm shocked.
Unfortunately, particularly with the utility funds, the percentage increase tends to be large as a percentage basis, but the actual quarterly impact on the residential homeowner is not as big of amount. Kevin, do you remember what it was the last?
I think for the average residential customer, it was somewhere around 15 to 20 for the year.
Yeah.
If you spread that over a quarter, is like buying a cup of coffee.
I mean, the advantage of the water fund is that water rates are lower than sewer rates. So a percentage increase on water has a lower dollar impact than one in sewer.
Sorry, and the $15 to $20 was doing it all at once as opposed to over?
That was the annual
Okay.
impact to the customer. Divide that by 4 bills.
Okay. Councilor Marcotte?
I really don't like that analogy because there are people living on shoestring budgets who can't even afford that cup of coffee. But as I look through the 3 utilities, it looks like the one that's least impacted is stormwater.
That's correct.
Correct.
187. And I was wondering what the driving forces of the larger amounts in the other utilities were. Is it debt service? Is it admin? What specifically is driving that deficit?
Well, you will see the revenues are flat, if not decreasing, by about $100,000. And then, even though costs are controlled, you still have the increase in debt service of about $100,000. You have the capital outlay that impacts it. And then, they've done a great job of holding the line on the operating expenses. But the fringe benefits and the personnel also impact that as well.
And what would be driving the decrease in revenue?
Generally speaking, over time, most water utilities that are in areas without a dramatically growing population are seeing, on average, a 1% per year decline in water usage, largely due to older fixtures being replaced with more water conservation fixtures, companies investing in water conservation in terms of their production, if they're using water in their processes, things like that. That's pretty much a nationwide trend.
And I would be wanting to look at the capital outlay in order to keep that debt service from growing as fast.
Yeah, one of the balance points there, obviously, and we can certainly look at, is to try to identify those capital projects that are required in order to keep the regulatory agencies happy versus those that may not be. The other issue, always keep in mind, and certainly there's some flexibility on the non-required items, is that we have an old system. It's been around for 100 years plus, and if you go back and look at the capital plans for the utilities, I think you can get some idea for how much old stuff is out there that at some point is going to have to be replaced, or you're going to see continuously more immediate emergency type repairs.
I think we still around 30 miles of online cast pipe that's affecting water quality to individuals, plus as Administrator said, there are some failures going on. I was riding around with Butch the other day, and we were looking at places where we've lined pipes. He was describing some of those, even getting to the point where some of that lining is sloughing off just due to wear and chemical reaction. So part of it's just keeping the system operating well. Is that accurate, Kevin?
Councilor LaJoy?
I guess it's Kevin. Where are we with the meter replacement program as far as a goal to finish? We 50% or replacing the old meters?
So water meters, PUCs requiring, based on the size of the meter, residential are to be tested every 7 years. We haven't met that for a long time, so we've been budgeting testing or replacement of meters on a 10-year cycle for residential.
Right.
We're still finding older meters in there, but we're right around 12 to 15 years on age, as we're pulling older meters out. So ideally, it would be the new meters going in actually have a longer life, We'd be potentially looking at either battery or some warranty stuff.
Have you seen an increase in revenue with replacing, with the new meters for a more precise usage of the product of water?
It's hard to get because we're on a 10-year cycle, it's really hard because as they age out, we're changing them out. So really, to get a global perspective, it's the large meters, or anytime we do change a meter, we are measuring accurately and billing accurately. But overall, increasing revenues, unless we were to do a whole one or a more accelerated replacement schedule, I don't think you're going to see a dramatic increase due to meter changeouts.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right.
So as a reminder, Thursday's budget workshop will be the public safety as well as 911, the TIF program, and you also have the CDBG budget presented that night as well.
Thank you. Feel better.
Thank you.
Do we need a motion? No, right?
Keep your voice.
Huh?
I didn't think you were going to keep your voice. You did very well.
I was ready.
Because I wasn't.